there were instances of members of Congress, again, specifically on January 6th, but also before that, where either they were reaching out to the White House or the White House was reaching out to them, and through conduits to the president, including, as I said, Mark Meadows.
Okay. And what was the nature? Let's start with before January 6th. What was the nature of some of these communications with the White House or with co-conspirators of Donald Trump leading up to January 6th and members of Congress?
Well, it varied. Sometimes the communications were relevant to us to show that people were telling Donald Trump that the things he was saying were not true. Other times they were evidence of the false nature of the things that we're saying. So for an example would be, there are 2 voicemails that Rudy Giuliani left for senators, and those voicemails show him saying things that were not true, using knowingly false claims to try to get those senators to further delay the certification of the vote.
So you just mentioned that there were instances before January 6th of members calling the White House, and I'm summarizing, to basically express that some of the claims the president and his co-conspirators were making were not true. Is that what you just said?
Well, I should be specific. There were a variety of reasons that, and I'm not trying to say that any time someone contacted the White House, they were involved in a crime themselves or doing anything improper. But how this conspiracy that was trying to stop the lawful transfer of power, how that worked, it was important for us to understand. We had evidence from Department of Justice officials that Donald Trump said to them, just say the election is corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. I think given that was the perspective that Donald Trump had, our view is that the case we would have presented at trial would have been Donald Trump preying on the party allegiance of people in his party. And people like the vice president didn't agree to that. People like the elector from Pennsylvania I mentioned didn't agree to that. People like the Speaker of the House in Arizona didn't agree to that. But the extent to which those contacts were happening was relevant to our investigation.
Okay, so let's dig down a little bit in that. Let's start on January 6th. So I believe in the evening, did your investigation uncover or learn that Mr. Trump personally called members of Congress on the evening of January 6th?
Yes.
Do you remember who those members were?
I'd have to look at the records to be sure, but to the best of my recollection, he was trying to get in touch directly himself with Senator Hawley and Senator Haggerty. And then there were several senators who he directed Rudy Giuliani to get in touch with.
And who were those senators that Mr. Trump directed Mr. Giuliani to get in contact with, to the best of your recollection?
To the best of my recollection, and this comes from a email, or I think it was a text maybe, that Boris Epshteyn sent to Mark Meadows, and it basically said something to the effect of the president told the mayor to call these senators and they needed numbers. And what our investigation ultimately showed was they sent that text after they'd already started trying to call members and didn't think they had, and ended up understanding that they didn't have the right phone numbers. In fact, the message that they left for Senator Lee, which he voluntarily provided to our office, that was meant for Senator Tuberville, I believe, and the message that he left for Senator Sullivan, I believe it was for Senator, the name's escaping me now, but it was another senator that he meant to call. We had also interviewed Boris Epshteyn before these subpoenas were issued. He corroborated that they were, in fact, trying to call senators. he dissembled and tried to imply that the president hadn't directed him to do it, even though there was a text message saying specifically that they had. But he agreed that they tried to call these senators and that they had certain senators' numbers themselves, and so they didn't need those numbers. And that would be, I believe it was Senator Cruz, and possibly, I think he said they possibly tried to call Senator Graham as well.
Taking a step back, this might be obvious for a lot of folks, but just to make sure it's clear for the record, who is Mr. Epshteyn?
Boris Epshteyn was one of the co-conspirators in this case.
And what role did Mr. Epshteyn play in the larger conspiracy, if you can summarize it?
Well, he played several roles. He was involved in the fake elector scheme, and also in sort of pushing out some of these false fraud claims. The other thing, I'm sorry, just to go back to mention is, we also, in the course of the investigation, interviewed Rudy Giuliani. And one of the things that we asked him, if you recall, in the message, I can't remember which senator it was for, but in the message that he left, he said, referenced the fact that he was calling on fellow Republicans. And in the interview, we asked him, why did you say you were calling on your fellow Republicans? And he said, well, I wasn't going to be calling Democrats about this. Even some Republicans wouldn't go along with this. And so, of course, I would call only Republicans. And in fact, that was consistent with our investigation throughout, that the people that President Trump and his co-conspirators reached out to were people who they thought would go along or help them because of party allegiance. And Giuliani in particular would reference that he expected their cooperation because they were Republicans. There was one particular meeting that he attended where he got a hostile reception because he had no evidence to back up the fraud claims. And he said something to the effect of, I thought we were all Republicans here. And so that was a theme throughout the case, and it went to the strength of the case that we had, because the witnesses we were going to call were the people that the president reached out to sort of further this criminal scheme.
I want to touch on a point, because it seems like the evidence you uncovered showed certain members of Congress, including Republicans, pushing back on this assertion about the big lie. And I'm characterizing some of these claims about the election as the big lie. Is that okay if I use that term?
You can use whatever term you like.
Oh, I'm going to use the big lie. So did you recall any evidence when you were talking to Mr. Giuliani that he truly believed all the voter fraud claims that he was putting out around the country?
Our evidence was he did not. And in fact, when we interviewed him, he disavowed a number of the claims. He claimed they were mistakes or hyperbole. Even the claim about Ruby Freeman, where he, basically destroyed this poor woman's life by claiming she was a vote scammer. President Trump did the same thing in a recorded call with the Secretary of State. He disavowed things he'd said in that interview.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Were you able to interview some of the individuals that our January 6th committee was unable to interview? For example, did you interview Mark Meadows?
We did.
We were unable to talk to Mr. Meadows. Were you able to find out what the communication was between Mr. Meadows and Mr. Bannon and potentially Mr. Stone on the evening of January 5th at the so-called war room at the hotel?
I don't recall that as I sit here right now. I know Mr. Meadows spoke to a number of people who were either involved in or adjacent to this conspiracy. As I sit here right now, I don't recall that specific evidence. I think he was in touch with Bannon, but I don't recall specifically the answer to that question.
Mr. Bannon made an extraordinary video basically predicting the events of January 6th on the day before. Were you able to discover either by interviewing Mr. Bannon or those who had knowledge of what he was doing, how he was aware of the riot before it happened?
We did not interview Mr. Bannon. I believe that particular statement you're talking about would have been part of our proof, and my recollection is that we had evidence that would indicate from some point, not immediately after the election, but shortly thereafter, sometime, might have been closer to December period, that Bannon, who had been out of touch with President Trump for some period of time, got back in more regular touch with him at some time. And in fact, this is reminding me, my recollection is that we had a text thread that between Bannon and Epshteyn that went through a lot of this period. On that text thread, I believe it was the evening of January 6th, right around the time the senators' calls were occurring at the direction of the president. And there was an exchange between those two wherein I believe it was Epshteyn asked Bannon, "Are you in touch with him?" And the answer was affirmative, and it was something to the effect of, "He's still on fire." And that's right at the same time that these calls are happening, after he refused to do what he could to stop the attack on the Capitol, after the tweet about Mike Pence.
In December, there were several meetings in the White House where efforts were to overthrow the election were discussed in terms of the fake elector scheme. The president issued his tweet calling the mob to Washington that it would be wild. Did you identify members of Congress who participated in any of those meetings
Participated in meetings at the White House.
in December?
I'm thinking now, I can't say that we didn't, but as I sit here right now, I can't think of a member of Congress in particular that attended the meetings I'm thinking of right now. Not saying it didn't happen, I just don't have a
I want
recollection.
to follow up on that. There was a December 18th meeting. Do you remember a December 18th meeting at the White House right before President Trump then issued the "Will Be Wild" tweet in the early morning of December 19th? Do you remember I believe Ms. Powell was there and others were at the White House discussing with Mr. Trump?
I remember there was a meeting with Sidney Powell where there was a discussion about whether she would be appointed a sort of special counsel to sort of have this role that would assist Trump in pushing these claims of election fraud that were false. My recollection of that is the meeting ended, I believe, with President Trump saying, "I want her in that position," but then it didn't happen because she didn't fill out the paperwork, clearance paperwork necessary for that. I don't know if that's the 18th, but it's around that time.
And do you recall any members, just following up on Ms. Laughlин's point, do you recall any members of Congress being present or participating in that meeting?
There's a record of this in our files. I remember certain individuals. I think Mark Meadows was there. An individual by the name of Eric Hirschman was there. I think Rudy Giuliani was there. There was a number of people there. I'm not remembering if there's anybody in particular you can ask me and I can see if I could remember, but that's what I remember now.
Who introduced the idea of Mr. Clark becoming Attorney General?
Our investigation determined that Congressman Perry had a role in getting Jeff Clark on the radar of President Trump as someone who could help him, and getting meetings with Jeff Clark and the president.
And we might touch on Mr. Perry's involvement later on. Just want to flag that for you. So it sounds like, and I want to hear it from you, did your request for the toll records of certain congressional members, did that relate to phone calls made to these members of Congress on or around January 6th of 2021? Including
that, yes.
And how big was the window of records that you requested for these members of Congress?
The records regarding those calls on January 6th, the period of time was from, I believe it was January 4th to 7th, but there was earlier subpoenas, including the one referenced earlier today regarding